everybody. Welcome to episode 15 of the Beach Boys podcast. I am Mike, joined by Brandon and Nate. Good to see you guys.
Hello.
Great to see you.
Yes.
And tonight we are going to be talking about a person who was a very pivotal role in the Beach Boys and in the continuation of the Beach Boys as a band, who often gets overlooked, and that is Bruce Johnston. And for me, kind of the reason why I wanted to do this album or this episode was similar to the previous episode where we talked about Phil Spector, because I don't know a ton about Bruce Johnston, but I know that Nate, being the Beach Boys scholar that he is, I know that he's probably loaded with tons of information, as well as Brandon. So I thought this would be a really fun episode to get to know the life and career of Bruce Johnston a little bit more. So I'm excited to do this. So Nate, you want to just maybe start us out from his early life, and then me and Brandon can chime in wherever we feel appropriate?
Yeah, so Bruce was adopted into a family that owned a major pharmacy, or at the time like a major pharmacy. So he grew up in like a wealthy part of like the LA area, probably Beverly Hills or Bel Air, and through that, he was able to, or through like his parents' financial comfort, so we'll put it, he was able to attend a music camp in the summers, which is actually very close to me, and I used to see posters for it in my middle school, which really tempted me. Little did I know that Bruce Johnston went there.
Yeah.
And once I found out he went there, I was begging to go there. But unfortunately, my parents didn't have Bruce Johnston parents' money. But anyway, so it was called like the Interlochen, I think they call it the School of Music, but it's basically like a summer camp where Bruce learned how to play like classical piano and would play in classical ensembles and jazz ensembles. And as he put it, not only was that great, but he learned so much just from being there and being able, he said, I'm paraphrasing, but like from the moment he would wake up, he would hear the orchestras tuning up, like the conductors tuning the orchestra. And just from that until going to sleep, it was music all day. So even when he wasn't learning, there was music going on in the background, or he and his friends were jamming early rock and roll. So Bruce definitely had a musical foundation from a young age that very, very, very few rock musicians have. Like even Phil Spector had guitar lessons from a guy that would go on to be part of the Wrecking Crew, which is, not too shabby of a teacher, but still not, which is nothing compared to like with what Bruce explained of just being immersed in music like that and of such a high caliber for so long. So the reason I go into so much detail about that is Bruce's classical training is very evident in his writing and playing throughout the years. So it's really important to him, and the camp itself is important to him, and he continues to like donate and do sponsorships and so on and so forth. So
That camp is still around?
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing that you see posters for it. I feel like you're just filled with weird coincidences like that involving
right?
different members of the Beach Boys. Like it's like you were meant to be like obsessed with the Beach Boys.
I totally feel the same way. So Bruce had such a great foundation, and was fortunate enough to grow up in Southern California around. So he was going to Uni High with Jane and Dean and Sandy Nelson and Phil Spector, and just all these people that would go on to be pivotal people in the pop music, surf music, so on and so forth. So they would have early bands with like various titles. There was this clique called the Barons that Jan Berry of Jane and Dean was a part of, which evolved less into a high school jock clique and more into like a music group. So Dean Torrance would be there, and Sandy Nelson would be there, and Bruce Johnston would be there playing piano. Um, so one of Bruce's earliest musical contributions, major contribution, which he wasn't even credited for, um, uh, uh, was producing Sandy Nelson's Teen Beat, or not producing, arranging Sandy Nelson's Teen Beat. And unfortunately, Sandy Nelson uh, passed away very early, but um, Bruce arranged the record, arranged all the instruments. But since they were so young, just either in high school or freshly out of high school, Bruce wasn't privy um, to all those details. He didn't really know what the arranger was and how he should be compensated in terms of rock and roll.
So this had to be in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the exact year?
It would 57, and there would have been reissues of like re-record versions in the 60s, but this initial version was in the 50s.
That's just mind blowing that he was doing stuff
Yeah, I know, when he's like 14.
and he's
Yeah.
still touring like with Mike.
Yeah.
It's so crazy.
I may be wrong if he was 14. If that was, I may be wrong about that.
I think he's 78 now.
So it could have been early 60s or 59. Could have been 59. Late 50s, early 60s.
Even still.
Right. So high school age, and yeah, you couldn't rely on me for concepts, but sometimes these years get a little fuzzy now. So yeah, Bruce had an insane first day on the job, despite I mean, his first. You could say he was already musically involved, self-employed in terms of playing with bands, like I mentioned. But his first day technically working in the industry.
Here we go.
Is for a guy named John Dolphin, and John Dolphin was a music executive, had Cash Records, Dolphin Records, among many other record labels, and Bruce got a low-level position, and on the first day on the job, when after Bruce had talked to the John, he's in the hallway or the reception area, and someone walks in angrily, pissed off, walks into John's office, and Bruce hears bang, and turns out the guy killed him. Bruce had witnessed a murder on his first day in the music industry. So I guess a lot of people would be too frightened to keep going after that, but Bruce obviously super determined to this day to be playing music and keeping going forward.
That is such a Beach Boys thing to happen. Like that,
Totally.
that even before the Beach Boys,
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that kind of Bruce did have some early records that in this time, which weren't lighting the world up, but he was still producing for artists, and he was arranging and writing. His first single, "Take That Pearl," and I Saw Her First, did an instrumental called LSD 25 that came out in the 50s.
Wow.
So
interesting.
Bruce was way ahead on the whole LSD trend.
It's hard to believe that when he says he never took it. Well, how could you be on that trend so early?
In the 50s.
Yeah, or if not very early 60s, because it's
right.
hard to find some of the information on this stuff. But so yeah, it's interesting because Bruce basically was a very early innovator of like surf rock, um, not only in the instrumental sense but also in the combining vocals, because he had a record out that predated Surf and Safari by a few months, that was re-released under a bunch of different names, but at the time called Surfer's Pajamas Party, which gets really confused with another album that the label released called Surfer Pajama Party. So hence it's very hard to find the Bruce Johnston version.
It's Surfers, right, for the Bruce one.
Yeah, Surfer's Pajama Party.
And
yeah.
is it under the Bruce Johnston name, or is it a group that surfed Stompers?
I think so. That's the other one, and
That is
then
the other one?
the Bruce one is the Bruce Johnston Surfing Band.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
So
I listened to the wrong album.
yeah. So there you go. The album, the record label should not have done that because it's still causing problems today.
Well, it was like when I looked up the album online, like there was very little information about it. It was actually kind of hard to find anything about it.
Yeah. So the Bruce Johnston version is really interesting because it has like a lot of the covers that his contemporaries would be doing, like What Did I Say? The Righteous Brothers and the Ronettes both did under Phil Spector's production. Kansas City, Jan and Dean did it, and the Beatles did it. So a lot of the early '60s standards, but it's cool because it's very obvious surf instrumentation, but it's vocals on top. So it's not the harmonies that Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys would add on top of the instrumental surf, but nonetheless, it's moving forward from surf just being an instrumental genre. So it's really hard to find the right copy, and I don't want to necessarily say on a YouTube video like, hey, hit me up for the music, because it's not my music. But if you're able to get your hands on the copy, what I can do is send Mike the Bruce Johnston version track list, so you know that you're finding the Bruce Johnston version. It's a really interesting album because it, like I said, it's kind of straight up surf rock arrangements of like the rock standards of the day.
And this was the first album under his own name?
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
And that was 62, right? You were saying? June of 62.
And it was performed live at UCLA. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. So in a way similar to the Beach Boys concert or the Beatles Hollywood Bowl, I guess not that bad. A lot of screaming girls and stuff. But it's also really interesting to hear Bruce as like the sole MC of like a band that's like rocking super hard. And Bruce kind of like screaming like kind of like how McCartney did his screaming thing, like the Bruce version of that. It's a trip of an album to listen to. And so there was like a Fender bass and guitar, drenched in reverb. And the bass is like a fuzz bass. And Bruce is like shredding on a Wurlitzer electric keyboard the whole time. So with his classical skills. So it's a very cool album, and it's like a great start, in my opinion, as an artist.
Well,
like,
talking about Bruce's instrumental skills, I guess I've heard quite a few people say that like out of all the Beach Boys, Bruce was the best instrumentalist of them all.
Yeah, I think Hal Blaine said that Bruce was the best keyboardist he'd ever met or ever played with.
That's pretty cool.
I mean, coming from Hal Blaine, I mean that's. It makes me wonder if the Beach Boys were listening to that album,
Yeah.
because they connected with him at some point for Mike to have called him and reached out to ask who he knew to join.
Oh, and now
Eventually, later
that was
on,
Brian, wasn't it? Not Mike.
I guess I actually think when Bruce tells the story, he says that it was Mike.
Oh, I always
I
thought
think
it was Brian,
Mike.
but okay.
I think Brian was the one who made the decision,
Mm.
but Mike was the one who had to make the phone call.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Or it was who was going to replace Glenn Campbell.
Yeah,
I think
that's
Brian
right, yeah.
chose Glenn Campbell, and then Mike chose who was going to fill in for Glenn Campbell.
Right.
Or, uh, but yeah, I wonder if the Beach Boys were listening to that, if they knew about it. So yeah, that kind of leads us to the Beach Boys releasing Surfin' Safari and Surfin' USA, and Bruce had said himself that one day he was riding in the car going to the beach surfing, and the song Surfin' came on the radio, and it like clicked to him that that even though he had made surf instrumentals or surf arrangements of standards, he said, "Oh, finally, someone has written a song about like going surfing and going to the beach." Little did he know that Brian Wilson was not a surfer.
Right.
But so that leads Bruce to making his debut, like surf, like lyrically surf album, Surfing Around the World, which is kind of a combination of a lot of everyone calls them Beach Boy knockoffs, but in which to a degree they are. But I have a personal theory that that applies, I guess, to Bruce, the Beach Boys, and Jane and Dean, that and Jane Barry, that Bruce, Brian, and Jan were all very inspired by like 50s rhythm and blues and surf rock, and very interested in harmony. So you can't, just because there's harmony on top of surf doesn't necessarily make it like a Beach Boys knockoff. Well, you have to give some credit to the Beach Boys for making the first surf song with like harmonies and that Beach Boy sound. It's probably inevitable that Jan and Dean and or Bruce would have done that too,
Yeah.
And that's not to take any credit away from Brian and Mike and their genius, but it's just that it was a thing happening in Southern California, and it was inevitable that like someone was going to do it. It just so happens that the Beach Boys did it first and did it amazingly. Well, Beach Boys and Jane and Dean fans will always argue who did it first, but nonetheless, and luckily I'm both. So I'm on.
You're right in the middle.
Yeah. So,
one thing I was going to say real quick in terms of the harmony too, like people that like surf music but are also interested in harmony. The thing that I think is interesting about that too is you can hear that each person is coming at it from a slightly different angle in terms of the harmony, where with somebody like Brian, he studied like the Four Freshmen and a lot of the barbershop quartet, whereas now with somebody like Bruce studying classical music, I'm sure there's going to be some subtle differences within the way that they approach the harmony just based on that, and kind of combining that with the surf rock, I think just makes for some nice different combinations of styles,
Totally. And Jan Barry, who we can do an episode on someday, we can do a Jane and Dean. I know he was studying classical at UCLA while he was doing the Jane and Dean stuff. And he was specifically inspired harmonically by Bach, and a lot of Bach movements are replicated in Jane and Dean, like harmony blocks or like arrangements.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So, like I said, like Jan was studying harmony in college. Bruce had that interlocking training as a kid. So you can give both of those guys credit too for putting harmony on top of surf.
Is Jan Barry a lot older than Bruce, or are they from the same generation?
Same generation. They were in high school together.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, Jane and Dean and Bruce went to the same high school.
Wow. Wait, didn't a
Um,
Beach Boy go to your high school too? Wasn't that another weird coincidence, or somebody
the
associated
Beach
with the
Boys
Beach Boys?
manager Jack Riley did for
Yeah. See,
some
this is what I
time.
mean. For
Yeah.
people that haven't listened to all of these episodes, Nate just has so many weird
Or
coincidences
their
like this.
former manager, who is a big part in Bruce's story. We'll get to
Yes.
later.
Mm.
So, Surfing Around the World is like a really cool album, and we can all give our takes on it. I guess I can start it off. Like I said, it's like a combination of like Beach Boy style songs and like straight up surf instrumentals. And what like so I'm gonna put it this way, like hard rock isn't really my thing, and this album is pretty much hard rock, and I think for instrumental wise, like very distorted bass, particularly in guitars, like for the time, as much distortion as you could possibly get, and like kind of like very metal, like intervals, like the sax wailing, super dissonant, like it's some real like metal shit, like like if you listen to it in the context of 62, it's like, or 63, it's like very like heavy stuff, like almost to the point where like you could mix it in with like any punk band and people probably wouldn't notice much of anything, I feel like. So like on that wave, the album doesn't do a whole lot for me. um I mean, I do love surf rock. I love surf, but this was like extreme. I feel like this was really pushing it harmonically. But Bruce always does that in his arrangements. I feel like he does very dissonant stuff throughout, always, like extension wise. I guess I'll save that for our chord stuff. Um, but so yeah, the rock and roll is cool and very interesting, and he uses like the Fender bass as lead instrument, which is cool for the time. And the vocal stuff, it's nice. Like as a fan of like the California sound, I think it's like a perfect surf album, and it like holds up with like uh Surfing USA and Jane and Dean Take Linda Surfing, and like the stuff his contemporaries were releasing at the time. It fits right in. The harmony laden stuff, not necessarily the distorted hard rock stuff. I mean, metalheads might laugh at me for calling it hard rock, but I'm excited to hear what you guys think about like those instrumentals.
All right, well, I'll go next. Well, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't get a chance to listen to this one, but I did listen
Okay.
to Going Public. But after hearing what you just said, I need to listen to it. I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, I
Very
can't
metal.
wait
It's
to
like
hear
metal.
Yeah, it's like metal adjusted for like 1962. Like it's not metal by today's standards, but like
Right.
some of the like intervals and rhythms are like remind me of metal.
I'm intrigued for sure.
Okay, so I should have re-listened to it, but I didn't even think about it for some reason. So it's been quite a while since I've listened to Surfing Around the World, so I can't remember too much about it. But I will. But the song that's sticking out to me at the moment is Down Under, because it's a very silly song, like incredibly dumb, but it's a lot of fun. You know, they had the surfboard before the kangaroo, and lyrics like that are very very interesting. And you know, it's got some enjoyable. From memory, it's got some enjoyable. I mean, you know, I don't remember like loving it or anything like that, but it's got some enjoyable, you know, fun kind of light-hearted 60s kind of almost novelty-ish kind of, like some of the song titles remind me of like
mashed
yeah
potatoes.
remind me of like one-eyed one horn flying purple people eater kind of level stuff. You know.
Yeah, I
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a concept album, which I forgot to mention, about like literally surfing around the world. So we've got Surfing Around the World, Makaha at Midnight, Down Under, as Brandon mentioned, which is about Australia, I think.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, Cape Town, Beer or Ritz, I can't pronounce that. Jersey Channel Islands, which is a heavy instrumental, the Hamptons, Virginia Beach, Surf Nova. So it's like all of these surfing spots around the world, and then all of a sudden you've got hot pastrami, mashed potatoes, and then Malibu, and surfing's here to stay. So I don't, but you know, the '60s albums were famous for like filler. So I guess that's kind of
Right.
the equivalent. Even though the hot pastrami song, I will admit, like I personally think it's fun.
The title track from memory kind of sounds like Surf and Safari, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember that.
I think the title track is pretty strong. Like it like let's say hypothetically Bruce was already in the Beach Boys, like that song would have been great on a Beach Boys album and may have been a hit with like Brian and Mike's voice, and you know what I mean? It was already the Wrecking Crew playing it.
So up to this point, was he pretty much in California his whole life?
Yeah, except for the summers where he'd visit the Midwest. Yeah, born and raised California.
Another California native.
Yeah, and he was working. Well, actually, he may not have been born, but he was raised in California by his adopted parents.
Right.
But yeah, so with this Surfing Around the World album, he's using the Wrecking Crew. He's doing all the arranging, writing with the Wrecking Crew. So like stuff that Brian. I guess Brian was also doing the same by '63, as was Jan Berry. So they were all kind of getting hip to that. Although Jan had his first song with the Wrecking Crew in '58. But anyway.
Jeez, there you go.
I'll save all that. So yeah, at this point, like Bruce has kind of clout in the surf music scene, pop music scene. And he has become friends with Terry Melcher, who goes on to be like a huge figure in the Beach Boys story. And they form a duo, Bruce and Terry, and release more like Beach Boy style music, and mostly singles. There was no Bruce and Terry album at the time. But that stuff, most namely, they had hits with like Thank You Baby and Carmen. And there's a great story of this is 1964 when Bruce and Terry were at Columbia Studio recording. They were wandering around in the like back equipment rooms and stuff, and the engineers were saying, don't go back there, and they're like, why, and they're like, you're not interested in that stuff. So
I think you're muted.
Yeah.
I'm muted.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where did it? So they wander into the back, and sure enough, it's an 8-track tape machine. Where at the time everyone else was using 4-track, including like Brian Wilson, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, so on and so forth. And it was made custom for Disney to do like orchestral scores. So Bruce and Terry convinced the engineers to let them hook it up and record a song with it, and their music going forward with it. And so the first song they did with it was a song written by Phil Sloan and Steve Berry called Summer Means Fun, which was a big hit like nationwide. And so it was probably the first pop hit recorded, or definitely the first pop hit recorded on 8-track tape machine.
There you go. Can I just tell a quick story about Terry Melcher now that he's here? There's this. I learned about this a couple months ago. There's this time where apparently Terry and Brian were having a bit of a conversation together, and apparently Brian was worried that Marilyn was cheating on him or something. And then Terry said something like, look, Brian, if it was anyone else, yeah, you could worry. But for a woman that looks like Marilyn, like, come on, there's nothing to worry about. And and then because this was on a Beach Boys server, and then I'm like, and now ever since that, I call every time Terry gets brought up in a conversation, I call him Fishman, because he really does look like a fish. Like, and I'm just like, the nerve of a guy that looks like Terry Melcher, because I mean, I think we can admit he's kind of a weird looking guy, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like his eyes are like really like kind of like far apart. Anyway, I mean, it doesn't matter, but I mean, just the nerve of him to like comment on Marilyn's looks, you know, I mean, I just thought was,
That's a good point.
you know,
Yeah.
but yes, side bit, but yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, Bruce and Terry, their stuff is really underrated. They have a great compilation that Sundays put out, and I love their version of Custom Machine. I think it's way better than the Beach Boys version.
Don't Run Away. I mean, that's
Don't Run
always the
Away
one that
is
everyone. That
magical.
is such a lovely song. Like, Mark, have you heard that?
No, I gotta check this out.
You got to listen to
Bruce
Don't
and
Run
Terry.
Away. It's
Is
really
Bruce and
like
Terry on Spotify?
yeah, that comp is
Yeah, Don't Run Away was like the only song. There have been other songs so it's the only Mike and Bruce composition. Like there have been other songs where it's Mike and Bruce and other people, but that was the only one where it was just Mike and Bruce.
It's got a very Summer Days and Summer Nights / Pet Sounds sound to it.
Really?
Like
Wow.
one of the ballads off like a Let Him Run Wild or a California Girls. Wow. It's got that kind of sound, and it's really nice.
Well, I'm really intrigued.
Easily one of the most gorgeous songs I've ever heard.
This is the one you.
Definitely
this
up
is
there, yeah.
Don't Run Away.
That was 66.
Yeah, 66. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so Bruce and Terry, that was like a several year thing going from 63 through 66, was when we're contractually like able to be done with it. But they made such a variety. They started with surf stuff, and then as Terry Melcher had success with the Byrds, they made basically Bruce and Terry you can hear Bruce and Terry pre-Byrd songs where Terry Melcher is like testing out the Byrds formula that he invented for the Byrds, like the 12-string covering like folky type songs. There's several Bruce and Terry songs in that nature where, in my opinion, it was Terry kind of testing out that sound, meanwhile Bruce was testing out the sounds of where the Beach Boys would be going with Pet Sounds, like Brandon mentioned. So what started off as Bruce and Terry started off as let's make hits for the label, it ended up being their avenue to experiment on like the major projects they were working on by the time, which is really a cool opportunity when you think about it, because by 65 and 6, Bruce is in one of the biggest bands in the world, and Terry's producing two of them, the Byrds and Paul Revere and the Raiders, and so they're able to test out ideas essentially for these other groups within this Bruce and Terry unit. So the compilation that Sundays did is great. It covers basically all the highlights of what they did, and it really covers a lot of musical ground and genres.
The only thing I find a little disappointing about Bruce and Terry's stuff is that Terry sung most of the leads.
Yeah, I wish Bruce did more.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Bruce has such a lovely voice. I don't understand why he wouldn't sing more, you know?
Amen. Amen. Like, if it's Bruce and Terry, it should have been like Jane and Dean, where they switched off doing leads. Yeah. Very few Bruce leads. Bruce is kind of like the Brian, and Terry's kind of like the Mike. Terry's doing all the leads, and Bruce just does the falsetto, which maybe they were inspired by that like trade-off that Mike and Brian did, and Jane and Dean did too, I guess. So that kind of takes us, we kind of spoiled it because we were hinting at it, but everyone knows that Brian didn't want to tour anymore. He wanted to stay at home and write and arrange. And So Glenn Campbell filled in, but of course Glenn Campbell had other plans to be Glenn Campbell. And so Bruce gets the phone call, and he from Mike asking if he knows anyone. Bruce asks everyone he knows, and no one can. And Bruce realizes, like, I can. The crazy thing is that he had never played bass before, and picked it up for his first show. And there are recordings of not his first show, but like months within his first show. And just like Brian, he's already playing like super complex parts, if not more complex. Like the Help Me Rhonda bass line is a bitch to play. Like I play bass, and that is not an easy bass line. And Bruce is up there playing it while singing. Within like weeks of learning how to play the bass. And
It's crazy.
Is that the bass line? It's like
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, playing that and singing at the same time has got to be
I
complicated.
know. And Mike, you know how crazy those chord progressions are. Within like weeks of picking up the guitar, or the bass guitar in this instance, and then playing that on stage while singing is like beyond me. And it just, not only is it impressive that he could play and sing at the same time, but Bruce says that he's a terrible player, but I think he's very underrated. And he's not like McCartney, where he came up, or Brian, where he came up with amazing lines necessarily. But like, he's a damn good bass player, and I wish he'd continue to play bass today.
It's funny with Bruce. He always like puts his stuff down. Like I don't know why he does that. Like he's always
too humble, but it's like self-deprecating.
Yeah, he said once, I think it was like, this was around like KTSA, like 1980 or something. Dick Clark is like, oh, you know, I just don't think that my music is really suited for the Beach Boys, you know? And I'm like, what?
It's crazy, because Dick Clark asks him, they're on Dick Clark to promote Keeping the Summer Alive, in which Bruce has produced and written on. And Bruce is like, yeah, I don't think my music is really suited for the band. And it's funny, there was actually a lot of tension. You know, we don't even have to do this totally chronological. We can just talk about Bruce and his career. Because a lot of people can fill in the gaps. Because on bringing up Keeping the Summer Alive, and I think why he said that, I'll save it for later. Should we kind of go somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, we could just keep going chronological, and there's a story that veers off, and we could tell a story. But I mean, most people that are listening to this, I'm sure they know who Bruce is.
Yeah. So Bruce joins the Beach Boys, and he's on pretty much every track after he joins vocally. Brian totally utilizes his timbre, and Brian now realizes that he essentially has three guys that can reach that high falsetto range, him, Al, and Bruce. So that really opened up a lot of possibilities, and so now they could each take different parts, and there were 6 guys singing, and then multi-tracking that you have 12 guys singing, and so on and so forth. And not only was Bruce another voice, but he could lend his his like great instrumental talents for those few years in the studio. He plays a lot of keyboards on summer days and summer nights. He plays piano on Girl from New York City. He plays organ on You're So Good to Me, or I think and then on Girl Don't Tell Me, he plays like a Celesta. Do you know how it's pronounced, Mike?
I think it's Celesta.
Yeah. So definitely utilizing his talents. And then on the Party album, Bruce is playing bass. Him and Brian switched off playing bass on the Party album.
And of course, on other than, you know, doing being on the vocals on the kind of outro of California Girls, he's also doing the falsetto in the background of the Girl from New York City.
Yeah, exactly. Like Brian is doing the highest stack, and then Bruce is doing the even higher falsetto, like wailing, so to speak, type of thing. It just opens up so much more possibilities for Brian as a vocal arranger. And it's like people really overlook, like even today people say that Bruce is just clapping and why is he not playing his piano, but people overlook how crucial just his backing vocals alone are to everything Brian and Carl and all those guys arranged from the minute Bruce joined. Like his voice is just as essential to that blend as Mike or Brian or Carl's.
When you think, it's crazy that it took until Sunflower for Bruce to actually have a lead. You know?
Yeah.
Well,
should have happened sooner than that.
Funny, it's technically on. He's credited as having a lead on Bluebird. It's Mike, Carl, and Bruce.
Yeah.
He says that baby.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
doesn't
that's
really count.
Yeah, I wouldn't count that. No.
Then you could kind of. I mean, I honestly, I kind of count his parts on California Girls and God Only Knows as co-leads. Because if you're gonna call like Mike a co-lead for Goodnight Baby, Sleep Tight Baby, on Wouldn't It Be Nice, then you might as well call Bruce a co-lead on God Only Knows, you know?
Yeah, we'll have a full lead until Sunflower then.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, just like how Mike is credited on Wouldn't It Be Nice as a co-lead singer.
Yeah.
For example, Bruce isn't credited on California Girls or God Only Knows as a co-lead singer. Which is, I know it's semantics, but I feel like it's another example of Bruce being kind of overlooked.
So he didn't have a lead vocal part until Sunflower, and then he didn't have an original song on an album until 2020.
Yeah, so that kind of covers, like, keeps us moving forward, so I don't keep babbling. You know,
no, that's what this is for. I want as much info on these people as possible out in the world.
So yeah, like I said, he was crucial to like Brian's vocal arranging with Pet Sounds and Smile, and by the time of Smiley Smile and going to Hawaii leading up to it, he kind of took a little break because the drugs were kind of freaking him out, basically, to not beat around the bush. He says things got too weird, but that's essentially what happened. Like at this point,
doing drugs or being around drugs.
Being around, yeah.
So he wasn't like doing drugs.
I mean, I'm sure he smoked a little weed, but you know,
nothing heavy.
Yeah, like by this point, the other guys were getting into acid and that whole psychedelic, good vibrations vibe, so that Smiley Smile vibe, and so Bruce kind of took a hiatus, not in terms of quitting the band, but just he was less active on Smiley Smile, particularly. But on Wild Honey, he's kind of MVP. I mean, Carl is too. I mean, Brian, of course, Brian and Mike wrote all the songs, with the exception of the cover. But yeah, Bruce is instrumental. He's playing keyboard. In his instrumental contributions, he's playing keys and bass all over it. So, and again, his voice is a crucial instrument. Same thing can be said about Friends. And then that leads us up to 2020, where he gets his first original.
Yes, it's Faraway Place.
Love it.
Love it. Yeah, it's very nice.
Absolutely love it.
I think it's on par with like Let's Go Away for a While.
I think I might prefer it to Let's Go Away for a While.
Yeah,
honestly.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of see them as like a part 1 and 2, and then what's that song from No Peer Pressure? Halfway Moon. Yeah, that's like the part 3. I kind of see them as like a trilogy.
Yeah.
I think also like that track.
What's the one from Summer Days and Summer Nights? Summer
Means New Love.
Yeah,
I love that
would be like number 1, like kind of a sequence of like those dreamy Beach Boy instrumentals.
Such a nice conclusion to the first side too. I think it's like the perfect way to just wind down side 1, bring you into side 2. And also a song like that, I think, really shows you how compatible Bruce was with the Beach Boys, because all of these things that we're talking about in terms of his versatility as a multi-instrumentalist, his ability to sing the falsetto parts, and then also when you listen to a song like this, The Nearest Faraway Place, his sense of harmony is so adventurous and experimental and very similar in a lot of ways to how Brian writes, which I'm sure a lot of that comes from his classical training and stuff. But like, for a while when I was listening to this album, I had no idea that he wrote that song. And then I found out and I was like, wow, this guy's like a badass. Like this guy's no joke.
It's interesting because I think his harmony is like similar, but like clearly different. Maybe it's because I just listen to the Beach Boys so much, but like I can like hear a Bruce arranged vocal compared to a Brian arranged vocal. Like Bruce really goes for those high ninths above the chord, which I think you hear a lot in Faraway Place.
Yeah, I mean, more so, what I mean by that is probably more so just the fact that for being kind of in the same vein as the rest of the Beach Boys and that sort of genre of music, his writing, he's not afraid to like take chances and go to some pretty interesting places in his writing, you know.
Like even to their credit, Dennis also was not afraid to go to very interesting harmonic places. Even Al and Mike and Carl would throw in little moments of.
Did Al wrote "Wake the World," right?
Co-wrote, yeah.
Okay, because that has
Brian.
some really, really interesting chords going on there.
Yeah, and actually, like At My Window was like an Al composition mainly that they kind of tacked Brian's name on. I mean, I wasn't there, so I can't say that with definitiveness, but from what I've read and when you think about it, Al's has this folky sound throughout his originals, so it would make sense.
And I mean, speaking of At My Window, like Bruce's vocal, that might be.
Thank you for bringing us back to Bruce.
That might be my favorite Bruce vocal on At My Window. That's just like,
yeah, it's perfect for the subject matter.
Yeah.
I don't know who made that call. They were all producing, that record. But whoever decided for Bruce to sing those particular lines, it's like as light as a feather, like the lightness of his voice and the lyrics, it's like right on the money. And I've heard it pronounced Deirdre, but Mike, you knew someone.
Well, I knew somebody. I think it is pronounced multiple ways, but in the song, it sounds like they actually say Deirdre, right?
Oh, yeah.
Deirdre, right?
Yeah. However it's pronounced, that's my favorite Bruce composition.
Same.
Those chords are out of sight, and the melody is so haunting. I love Brian's vocals on Deirdre. How he sings that real high falsetto, and Bruce's production. Oh my God! Like the flutes and the horns. It's insane.
Yeah, amazing producer too. His production work is also just top notch. He also produced The Nearest Faraway Place, right?
Yeah.
Oh
like
my
all
God,
of
incredible.
All of the Bruce songs he produced.
Honestly, I think I have to say Deirdre's my favorite song of Sunflower. Like,
for me, it's probably that tied with All I Want to Do.
Yeah, it's just it's so good. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is a tough choice, Nate. I think I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Those two.
Those songs, Bruce and
Forever's great too.
Yeah, and on the note of Bruce, Tears in the Morning is a really great song too. It's very like divisive in the Beach Boy world. People
we've had these conversations so many times.
Yeah, like it's kind of schmaltzy and whiny. Like I get it. Like lyrically, it is kind of like, come on, man, like stop whining. But but musically, it's super cool. Like the mandolins and how like when he talks about like lighting a candle, how the strings come in and take like it's very creative arranging and production.
And as far as that album goes too, Sunflower, that has to be the album that has the most compositional input from Bruce, right?
No, it's Bruce's time to shine on
right, because he's got two songs that he wrote completely on his own, and then he collaborated on at least two or three more, I believe.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, he has three lead. He has 3 lead vocals as well, which is crazy. So
yeah, and he's playing keys and bass all over it, and Carl was spearheading the day-to-day production, but Steven Desper, the engineer for the album, had told me that Bruce was like all hands on deck for the album too, and at this point in time with Sunflower, all of the Beach Boys were involved with the production and the arranging and the composing. Brian, and this is all from what I've read and from conversations with the album's engineer. Brian, of course, was sick by this point, so he couldn't fire on all cylinders compared to, or I guess he couldn't work the same hours as he could like with Pet Sounds. But obviously, he could still come up with a This Whole World and arrange, like a This Whole World. So it's cool to see each member. It's cool knowing that each member was giving their input on each song, because it's not necessarily like a Carl and the Passions, where it's kind of strictly each member producing their own material. Sunflower was very all hands on deck. Like, what does each member have to say about the arrangement and about the production?
And not only did it give Bruce an opportunity to shine more, but it also did the same thing with Dennis.
Yeah, and I think there are little Bruce touches you can hear like almost in every song. And as for every member, I think there are touches of every member you can hear throughout the album. And I think the same continues into Surf's Up, unfortunately minus Dennis, who kind of abandoned the project out of protest.
We had a tantrum.
Aside from like backing vocals on some of the cuts. Those songs, like those thick harmonies on like Disney Girls, Bruce's song, and like Don't Go Near the Water, and even Surf's Up, like Dennis is definitely on there, and they would not be as rich without Dennis. So he was involved, but he wasn't playing drums because he had hurt his hand, and he wasn't letting his songs be on the album once he knew that they wouldn't conclude the album.
Ego.
But nonetheless, it continues in the same vein of Sunflower, where every member is all hands on deck. And although famously, when Bruce was trying to record Disney Girls, according to Desper's memory, things were getting contentious with Dennis and Carl over what we just talked about. Dennis wanted the conclusion of Surf's Up to be his songs, and Carl was like, no, it has to be Brian's Surf's Up. We're calling the album Surf's Up. And so they were getting really contentious. That was freaking Brian out. And it wasn't a good situation. So Bruce, while he was trying to record the backing track of Disney Girls, put up a sign. He was in Brian's home studio, mind you, and he puts up a sign on the door of the studio that says "No Wilsons," because they were just bickering and fighting, and he was trying to work. So Steven Desper, by this point, had like a multiple 8-track machines hooked up. The 8-track that once was a toy and of endless possibility for Bruce was now not enough. So they had multiple 8-tracks wired up. So Disney Girls is cool because many of the instruments are played by Bruce, for the reason probably that he wasn't allowing any Wilsons in. So he's doing like the keyboards and the synthesizer and the bass, and even mandolin. The mandolin on the intro is actually played by Bruce.
Wow. What a beautiful song.
Yeah, very nice.
I love that song so much. Might be definitely one of my favorite songs in Surf's Up. Maybe not my favorite, but it's in the top 3 for sure.
Yeah. A lot of people who I play the song for in my real like personal life, like, you know what I mean, like people who I know in person, once I show them Disney Girls, like it ends up being like one of their very favorite Beach Boys songs.
I had this kid that I used to give piano lessons to, this high school kid, and I turned him on to the Beach Boys, and he ended up really liking them. And when I showed him the Surf's Up album, this turned out being his favorite Beach Boys song, and we learned it on piano together. Like he wanted to figure out like all those crazy vocal harmonies in that little middle section. That middle section is absurd. I mean, Bruce wrote all those vocal harmonies in that part. That's insane.
That's all Bruce.
That part is really wild.
Yeah, and it's funny, when we mentioned that, I have this friend that I turned on like several Beach Boys songs to her, and when I got to show her the song Surf's Up, I showed it to her, and she said, it's pretty, but I still like Disney Girls better.
There you go.
Which is,
nice.
Bruce would be thrilled.
Yeah.
Actually, he'd probably be like, "Oh no, she's wrong. She's like."
It didn't fit. It shouldn't have been on the album.
Yeah.
They made a big mistake.
Yeah. So yeah, and Bruce throughout this time period on stage was like a machine. Like he was switching between keyboards and bass. All while singing. So he was like pretty essential to the live group. And when Blondie and Ricky joined, it wasn't, sometimes it's framed in a lot of Beach Boys books, and it's in the tabloids, and a lot of people say that Blondie and Ricky were to replace Bruce, but that's not true, because there were shows and there was a time period where it was Bruce and Blondie and Ricky and the rest of the guys. And Bruce even is the bassist on Marcella, on Carl and the Passions. So during the Carl and the Passion sessions, there not only were Blondie and Ricky brought in, but Mike had brought in a collaborator named Don Goldberg. Brandon, you can tell this one.
Okay, Don Goldberg. All right. Yeah, so Don Goldberg comes in and he writes a song called "Out in the Country," a very nice song. And he also sings on it. He does a lead for it as well.
Was it him and Mike doing the lead, or just
I think because there's two versions of "Out in the Country." There's one that Don sings, and there's one that Al sings. Okay. So yeah, so Don comes in, and then Bruce didn't like that very much, because he's like, oh, why is this this outsider coming in and writing a song and doing lead on it and putting it on our album, blah 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 blah, whatever. So he ran off with the tapes and wouldn't give them back, which is, guys, such a cartoon villain thing to do. But yeah, so and around the same time,
Brother Brian did in the Smile era too.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, because of that situation, depending on whether you believe Bruce or Jack Riley, Bruce either decided to leave the band, or Jack kicked him out, or they all agreed to kick him out.
Yeah, so yeah, some would say that they kicked him out because of that incident, which would make sense, and because of his bad attitude. Like the No Wilson's incident. According to Desper, it was on his own accord, because he was not a big fan of the direction they were going in. Disney Girls is evident, and he's a Pet Sounds fan and a Wild Honey fan. So he's obviously not afraid to go lyrically outside of surfing and cars. But I think Bruce thought that songs about real social issues of the day, which Jack Riley was pushing for with kind of Surf's Up through Holland era, he thought that the Beach Boys should be the escape from that, and not
which is fair, yeah.
Not the talking specifically about those issues and kind of inserting their opinions. So that was Bruce's justification for leaving, uh, from what I've been told.
I've also heard rumors that around the time that they were doing Sunflower, the guys were maybe like thinking of replacing Bruce with Billy Hinchy
Mm-hmm.
as
I've
well.
I've heard those rumors too, and my assumption is that they would have just added Billy Hinchy if in the way
Right.
they added Blondie and Ricky. I think Sunflower and Surf's Up proved that they were kind of relying on Bruce in a way. Um, they obviously could do it themselves, but they were using his songs and his
Yeah.
production. But yeah, but the funny thing is, even though Bruce, I think, and we were talking about this before we started, that I think really Bruce loved, and to this day obviously loves more than anything, being a Beach Boy. And but I think by this point, especially with all the fighting between the Wilsons and Mike and Al, that it was just more pressure than it was fun to have it be a 24/7 commitment. So he left the group, but he never stayed far. And so we can kind of go through in terms of the Beach Boys albums, and he's still singing and or playing on all of them until he rejoins, with the exception of MIU. But meanwhile, he was up to some pretty interesting things. He and Terry Melcher started a group called California Music, which California Music is actually kind of a thing again now, and it's the same concept.
Yes.
The original concept of California Music was that it was going to be like California Music, kind of like a supergroup. So it was Bruce and Terry Melcher and Brian Wilson was involved, and Dean Torrance was involved, Gene from Jane and Dean, and Leon Russell was involved, and Glenn Campbell was involved. All these guys that had contributed to surf music. It was involved, but everyone had different opinions, so it didn't really go much of anywhere. But they released a few singles, and I think an album came out, and Terry Melcher revived it later on, and David Beard just revived it and got Mike and Al and Bruce and David Marks and the Beach Boys children, Carney and Wendy, and they all did Add Some Music to Your Day.
They sure did.
Feeding America. And kind of an album is coming out in the same idea as the original California Music, where it's like there's a Mike track and there's a David Marks track and there's a Bruce track. So it kind of makes me think that the California Music name didn't just come out of thin air, and that David Beard probably asked Bruce, like, hey, like, can I use the name of like this band that you started, and like kind of continue the idea. And I haven't seen anyone talking about that, so here we are. I think we should kind of give Bruce props to that, because they're kind of doing this group now where it's like the Beach Boys and their children and their children's children. And I think it's sort of like like, not to be like negative or anything, but it's like it's so that this music will be able to go on longer than they will. So it's sort of an interesting evolution of, I don't think that was Bruce's intention in 1974.
Right.
But it's cool that that's where it's at now. And so, Bruce starts writing songs, and he writes like Let's Go to Heaven Tonight for Captain and Tennille, which was a hit. And he writes Barry Manilow, or he writes I Write the Songs, which wasn't originally Barry Manilow. He did his version, and lots of people covered it, but of course Barry Manilow had the biggest smash version of it, and Bruce won the Grammy. And he did his solo album, Going Public, which we've all listened to.
Real quick, before we get into that, can we just take a quick bathroom break?
Perfect.
And we will resume on the Going Public album. We'll be right back.
Let's go.
So,
all right. We are back. All right, so we're going to continue with Going Public, Bruce's third, technically it would be his third album, right?
Yeah. So
If you don't count Bruce and Terry.
in 76 going into 77, Bruce Johnston was offered by I believe it was Columbia again, but I'm just gonna double check that. In his own words, by Columbia Records, which he was a staff producer for during his early days for Bruce and Terry. Oh, we skipped over the ripcords.
Yes.
So if we can rewind to 64 and 65 a little bit, Bruce and Terry, what they were kind of doing the same thing as they did with Bruce and Terry, also with another group called the Ripcords, which they discovered and then under a different name, and produced several major national hits for Hey Little Cobra, Three Window Coupe, Hot Rod USA, Summer USA.
Hey Little what?
Hey Little Cobra.
Oh, I thought you said Hey Little Crowbar.
Oh, the funny thing is, fun fact is Hey Little Cobra was a co-write between Bruce and Terry, and Carol Connors, who sang the lead vocal on To Know Him Is to Love Him. She was the lead singer of the Teddy Bears, Phil Spector's first group. After the Teddy Bears, she became a songwriter. So yeah, she wrote a big surf hit with Bruce and Terry. So yeah, you could go in depth about that, but we can someday do a Ripcords episode maybe. So because they're a whole band in themselves. So that was under Columbia. So once again, Columbia Records comes to Bruce, and in Bruce's own words, they offer him a lot of money to do Go in Public, and he said that was the only reason he did it. But I think he said that only in hindsight, because there's a lot of potential in the album, I feel like. And so the production is credited to Gary Usher, but I think Gary Usher was only producing in a financial sense. Like we talked about Lester Stills and Phil Spector, like a Lester to Phil, or if Murray's producing a Beach Boys record compared to like Brian's really the one producing. But really the production has Bruce written all over it. Every song is pure Bruce, from the plethora of electric keyboards and Rhodes pianos, and all the flanger and delay, like that's pure Bruce stuff that goes back to Sunflower. But I think there's a lot to be enjoyed. I think this is my personal favorite version of I Write the Songs. I think there's just something most profound about hearing the person who wrote I Write the Songs sing it, Deirdre has become a guilty pleasure.
Disco Deirdre.
Yeah, because I love the song to begin with, as we were talking about, and disco's kind of a guilty pleasure. I grew up, like, my dad always had the 70s radio station on, so like the Bee Gees and stuff, like that sound is like a fond memory to me. So the disco stuff on here, incredible. I all dig. I think Bruce and disco actually goes well together, because disco has so much technicality, and somewhat like strings and stuff, and that's like right up Bruce's alley. Like
Let's Visit Heaven Tonight is great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's Bruce producing and writing and arranging. So I think Thank You Baby, that I like the Bruce and Terry version better, but this version's still pretty. Rendezvous is such a guilty pleasure. My roommate and Charlie and I will blast that in the car, even though it's like the lamest rock song ever written. Won't Somebody Dance With Me? Correction, that's the lamest rock song ever written.
Yeah, Jesus. I mean, even for Bruce, like, that is like so cheesy. It's ridiculous.
I know. It's literally, it's so Bruce. Like he just always has such like a dad vibe, I feel like, and that song is just so epitomizing that. Disney Girls, I think, is beautiful. He does some different harmony or different like chord inversions, and he kind of does bar extensions. Like he goes into a little mixed meter, kind of to show off his piano shredding skills. Rock and Roll Survivor, Country Bruce. I love this song. It's so corny, but like the concept of like surviving rock and roll, like it's such a Bruce thing. However, Brian and Dennis were both like on the verge of like death, to be frank, at this time. And Bruce had already known like Sandy Nelson, who had passed away, and a lot of guys who passed away. So I think it was a really genuine and honest thing, and like tender personal thing for Bruce to be singing about surviving rock and roll when it had taken so many of his friends, you know. Keith Moon, he was friends with Keith Moon. So it's actually, I think, on the surface like a kind of a stupid country song, but like on a deeper level, like kind of one of the deepest songs Bruce ever wrote. And then Don't Be Scared, I don't really have any thoughts on it. It's literally so plotting, and I can do Bruce and a piano if it's something as beautiful as I Write the Songs or Disney Girls, but Don't Be Scared to me has really nothing melodically or harmonically interesting.
Do you think that this album would have even been a thing if it wasn't for I Write the Songs and that success? You know?
Probably not. That's a good point. And I think it's a shame that Bruce, I think so like we talked about like the potential, and so like I think, and that's such a great point. I Write the Songs was this huge smash hit that kind of put Bruce in like a higher echelon of like classic rock songwriters. So like there was high expectations, and I think it was probably his kind of self-deprecating attitude that he kind of didn't know if he wanted to go country direction or ballader direction or disco. The album makes it pretty clear that he didn't want to do rock, and that was probably just he was burnt out from doing rock all those years with the Beach Boys. But I think it's kind of, the album suffers from like a lack of true direction. I think like if all of the songs like were disco or country and he just committed to a sound, it could have been cool. But it kind of feels almost like a compilation of like different ideas. But I think it's a charming album, and I think Beach Boys fans like should find, if you like the Beach Boys, you'd probably at least enjoy like
there's got to be something there for you.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
I think I do think one thing. I mean, I don't think. I mean, we're not. This isn't like Deirdre, Disney Girls level Bruce here. I think we can all agree. You know.
Yeah. I'd say probably with the exception of Rock and Roll Survivor. I'd say that's top tier Bruce in my opinion.
But I don't know. I feel like, I mean, the lack of new original songs is disappointing. To me, because there's hardly any new stuff on there.
After all those years.
Yeah, exactly. It's come like, Bruce, you had all this time. Like, you could have, you know, come up with
how many new ones? There's, I guess, if you're not counting Deirdre and Disney Girls and excluding the covers, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 5, right? Basically.
Yeah, and you like, like there's a lot of rehashes of stuff he had already done. You can go on, Brandon.
Oh no, that's just basically.
In terms of the songs that were redone too, I got to be honest, I don't like any of the versions as much as the Beach Boys versions. I think one thing that I think would have helped is there's not really any drum heavy songs on this album. There's a couple of the rocking ones, but in terms of like the Beach Boys re-recordings, like there's no drums, I don't think, on either of them. And I think the drive that the drums gave it on the Beach Boys albums, I like that vibe more. Like I don't really like as much the loose timing with the Disney Girls, right? That's the one at the beginning. He like doesn't do it like completely in time, right? Like I kind of like it better, like with a nice steady pulse, and then the drums come in on that second section.
Totally. Disney Girls,
like on Surf's Up.
I feel like if you had to arrange his version of Disney Girls, it's like filled with mixed meter, if you'd call it that, or just weird extensions. It's almost
Yeah,
just like drunk, like you'd probably know better than I do, but
the way that he's
definitely,
approaching the timing in that.
yeah, or just like I feel like even from you mentioning that, like one could easily feel like that there's like that lack of beat, and it's like
Right.
just kind of wacky time. And
Yeah, well, at the beginning, it sounds like he's just doing it like more rubato, like he's kind of just playing off of himself, because it's just him and the piano, I think, at the beginning, right?
yeah, and the
Um,
whole song pretty much.
yeah, but I did really like "I Write the Songs" and "Thank You, Baby." I thought those were both really pretty songs. So I think if you're a fan of Bruce's writing style, I think this album will have at least a couple of tracks that you would probably find enjoyable. That was the case for me, at least.
It's
Yeah,
it's it, yeah. It's much more like the album's much more like it's kind of like if songs like Endless Harmony and um
She Believes in Love Again, kind
yeah,
of.
it's kind of like an album worth of songs like that
Yeah,
for the
it's kind of
most
like a
part, you
preview
know.
of what you'd get from Bruce once he rejoined writing
Yeah,
wise.
exactly. Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to ask, so for the period that we covered Bruce, where he was in the Beach Boys and then had the falling out and all the stuff that came from that point on, how many songs did he write for the Beach Boys up to this point? Is it just 4 songs? So it's Nearest Faraway Place, Deirdre, Tears in the Morning, Disney Girls.
Well, he
Yeah,
wrote
and he also,
yeah, no, you go, Ned.
you can go because you might have one.
Well, I was just gonna say he wrote during the sessions for Carl and the Passions, he wrote
Oh yeah,
10 Years of Harmony, which turned into Endless Harmony later.
Mm.
yeah,
So,
and 10 Years of
so
Harmony was released as a California Music
there you
B-side.
go.
And he also co-wrote How She Boogalooed It, if that counts. So yeah,
So
and
we're up to
so
77, right?
yeah, and by
Yeah.
this point, Love You and
Right.
MIU are not doing too well. And I think this was a point I was thinking that I wanted to make beforehand, is that we really kind of have Bruce to thank for saving the Beach Boys. And I'm not sure if they would have carried on properly if they would have been able to without him. And this exact time period. I mean, Adult Child is beautiful, and we hardcore fans love the album, but I think even us fans can agree that if that was released commercially, there's no way that
Yeah.
could have done well commercially, and
No.
the band was losing money, and they had just signed a new label, or so yeah, they had just signed to a new label, CBS, and Brian was too sick to produce, and I think they had deemed Al that they gave Al a try with MIU, but MIU at least at this point hadn't done too well. Come and Go With Me hadn't become a hit yet, so they weren't confident with Al's ability, um, and I don't think Mike wasn't interested yet in being the helmer of a project. You'd get that later with Summer in Paradise, and Dennis was working on Bamboo. Carl was, and I just don't think Carl, I bet that at this point, was interested in really producing the Beach Boys anymore. And he had his solo career, which he was getting ready for. Yeah, exactly. He should have just saved Heaven for the Beach Boys and kept it at that. No, I'm
Exactly.
kidding.
Yeah. No, well, you know.
Evan and Hurry Love and Hurry Love.
um, excuse me. So they needed someone, and I think um, they could have gone with an outside producer again, like Nick Venet, or like they would later on, but I don't think that was the right move. They needed someone that knew how to produce Beach Boy music, and Bruce was the guy. Bruce was the man, and so Bruce came in, and LA was kind of similar to Sunflower in that each guy was writing, but it was kind of in the vein of Carl and the Passions, where kind of each guy was producing himself, but it wasn't really getting anywhere. And the album, they had a due date they needed to be finished by, and Al's famous for tinkering endlessly. So Lady Linda, that had to be finished, and Al was tinkering, and so they called. Ultimately Brian made the call to Bruce, because Brian was the scheduled to be the producer, and Brian said to Bruce, like, I cannot do this. Can you come and take over? So I think with the circumstances, Bruce did a terrific job with LA. It's not perfect, but it's definitely like one of their stronger like albums towards this era of their career. And he at least made it sound cohesive, I think. It's all different musicians playing from different sessions, and he kind of strung it together to make it a Beach Boys album. And then we get Keeping the Summer Alive, which is funny because Bruce gets blamed for the production when I don't think as much of it falls on his shoulders, because by this point, with the success of, or not, I mean, LA wasn't a huge success, but Sumahama and Lady Linda were both hits overseas. Good Timing was a hit in the States. So it definitely gave them a propel forward and gave the label a lot of confidence in Bruce. So it was decided that Bruce was to be the producer of Keeping the Summer Alive. But the problem, so Bruce really wanted to make, as he put it, a Bachman Turner Overdrive meets Gin and Dean type of record. He wanted it to be like surfy, but he wanted it to be like heavy and hard rock and be able to compete in the 80s. And Carl wanted to make an adult contemporary album, like kind of like what his solo albums would sound like smooth. Carl wanted the album to sound smooth and like I forget the term, like middle of the road, like that type of thing, like unoffensive, maybe like a Steely Dan vibe, as compared to where Bruce was going for something that would work in the stadiums that the Beach Boys were playing. And Carl wrote this great rock song, Keeping the Summer Alive, and Bruce said, like, quote, "It had drums for days," and it was ready to be the single, but Carl went in last minute, God love him, rest in peace, but turned it into a very soft, middle of the road song. With all that said, I think Keeping the Summer Alive is like an A+ album. Like, I think that the songs are great, and I think the production is fine. It's just the mastering that doesn't do it justice. I think if the album was properly mastered, I can be listening to any other Beach Boys album and then switch to Keeping the Summer Alive and have to turn up my computer monitors like way higher or turn up my stereo way higher. The album's mastered so quiet, there's no bass, and Bruce didn't master it. I think if the album was actually given a proper mastering job, people would think of it much differently.
I've heard people like say that listening to Keeping the Summer Alive like legitimately gives them a headache. Like something with just the way it sounds, it just makes them feel like,
Well, look at these really quick. This surprised me. I was looking at the Wikipedia page and look at the scores that it got.
Yeah, I know, terrible. It pisses me off.
I can't believe that. Yeah,
those fucking assholes.
Well, look. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think maybe like 1 out of 5 is a little harsh, but like, I don't think it's a great album. I mean, stuff like Living with a Heartache is like really that's the best you could come up with and put on an album, and like Endless Harmony I think is probably Bruce's worst song, or one of his worst at least.
You remember the first episode? I think was
I know.
my number 2 or 3.
I can't do it. It's just
that was number 2 or 3 on your top 10 list.
I think so. I can't remember that well, but it
Wow.
was definitely up there back then.
It's just like it's Bruce. It's cheesy, syrupy Bruce, but not like in a good way, in my opinion. Not like in a Disney Girls way, or
Yeah, for me, it hits me in a few ways, and we also had a debate about it. In one, I'm just a sucker for chords, and I think like those chords are totally like nothing I've heard. Um, I am a sucker for like the nostalgia side of the Beach Boys. Like I'm a fan of like that imagery and that like feeling of them pushing like I know like I don't agree with them necessarily going nostalgia right after Holland. Like it happened a little too soon. Um, but like that lyrically like reflecting over like 20 years as a band and striped shirt freedom and like I
Oh,
know
it's so
it's funny,
cheesy, Jesus.
like it's just like he was in those striped shirts, you know, like so like
He sure was. Yep.
you know what I mean, like so like to us it sounds corny, but like to him it was like truly actually reflecting on his life, you know.
Yeah.
Like to him, like not to go psychoanalyzing on Bruce, but he was making like okay money, but of course being a Beach Boy gave him like the financial freedom, and not that it's all about money, but he could do like whatever he wanted with his life, and you know he traveled Europe like he wanted to do, and so like not to dive in specifically on striped shirt freedom, but with just that as an example, like you know like it sounds so goofy, but like when you think about Bruce and his life, like and reflecting, like I do think it, you know, it is poetic despite sounding goofy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think keeping the summer alive is definitely, a lot of people don't like it. I've heard the headache thing too, which leads me to the mastering uh, conclusion too. Um, but yeah, I think this transitions us into kind of like this final like era of Bruce's role in the group, where he takes a step back as producer, but kind of becomes what I call him as like the production facilitator. Um, like I don't think he ever truly stepped away. I think he was kind of crucial um, in in keeping things moving as Carl kind of got less interested once it was established they'd be a nostalgia band. Um, so like for example, he was crucial, if not the one who convinced Steve Levine to produce Beach Boys '85. And then he was obviously the one that would get Terry Melcher involved with Beach Boys '85, and Melcher produced Kokomo, and Bruce was the one who was heavily rooting for Summer in Paradise to be recorded all on a computer with Pro Tools, the first album to be made that way. So I think it's cool because you have Bruce in the early 60s making like very pioneering surf rock. We forgot to mention you have Bruce in the 70s working on like The Wall, doing the vocal arrangements for The Wall. You know,
For the
you have,
Pink Floyd's Wall?
yep.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They wanted the whole Beach Boys, but the Beach Boys were fighting too much, so they ended up with
Really? Oh my God.
Bruce and his guys.
That would have been a trip to hear that. The Beach Boys on a Pink Floyd album.
Yeah.
Oh my
But there's
God.
Bruce and the Beach Boys backup guys and Bruce's people. So
Wow.
you have Bruce on the front of surf rock, then you have Bruce on the pioneering of like psychedelic rock with Pet Sounds, like vocally, and then again kind of with The Wall. And I really think that he's always been curious and pushing music forward and always found a way to involve himself in doing that. So you, with Summer in Paradise, you have him really rooting for the Pro Tools all on the computer route, which is now how everything's done. But in 1992, the technology just wasn't there. For example, Nirvana did the editing for Nevermind in Pro Tools, but still recorded everything on tape. And Dave Grohl famously called it Slow Tools. So Mike Love God love him, being famously like impatient to get the record out and get the hit out, you know, probably was, if he even noticed that the album sounded not up to standard production like uh, expectations and mixing qualifications. To him, it sounded like Beach Boy music, and I think to the album's credit, it does. And even though it kind of sounds like shit for being the first album recorded in Pro Tools, mixing wise, I think musically it's great, and Bruce has some credit to be given there. And I think going forward from there for the last 30 years, we obviously have Bruce to thank as for keeping the Beach Boys alive, because it was gonna go to Mike or Al, but by the time Carl passed away, Brian was not interested in being a Beach Boy. He wanted to tour by himself, and Al and Mike were competing for the Beach Boys name, and eventually one of them had to win, because for a while it was both of them touring as the Beach Boys, and when people eventually the way it became is when people book the Beach Boys, they don't really recognize any face except for like Mike Love, the guy with the baseball hat and the Hawaiian shirt. So they'd show up to Al Jardine shows and want refunds.
Poor Al.
So I know, poor Al, right?
Yeah.
So eventually, Brother Records was like, hey, like, what are we gonna do? And said, okay, Mike, like, fuck it, like, here, Mike, you get the license, and we'll, under the conditions that all the other Beach Boys and their estates get to take a percentage. So if you just had a band of Mike Love and just backup guys, it wouldn't feel so much like the Beach Boys. It would feel like Mike Love solo. I'm not sure. I don't think. Have you guys? Have either of you been to a Mike and Bruce show?
No.
They really do a fabulous job, and having Bruce there, just it really makes it feel like a Beach Boy show. The interaction between Mike and Bruce and seeing their camaraderie gives it authenticity. Hearing Bruce do the "I wish they all could be cat," like Bruce doing his signature parts.
Can you still hit those high notes?
He still does the falsetto on the outro of Fun Fun Fun. The woo woo. Bruce does that still to this day.
In the original key?
Yeah, actually, yeah, in the original key, and sometimes one step higher. They switch depending on what song precedes it. Also, if they do Surf City, Fosquet, or now not Fosquet, Ike, does the Surf City, here we come in the chorus, but Bruce does the woo, woo, woo. So Bruce actually does falsetto throughout the show when there's two falsetto parts to this day.
That's great.
And it's still up there, getting the audience hyped. What can you say? Doing a lot of clapping and doing a little keyboard shredding when he feels like it. But I think simply for him being there and still being dedicated after all these years, him and Mike have really kept the band alive, and their show is incredible. And on the subject of Bruce being interested in musical production innovation, I think a great way we can kind of close his story before we add some final thoughts is that he was in the studio recently with famous dubstep producer DJ Skrillex, doing vocal arrangements and vocals on a Skrillex, or now he might go by Sonny Moore now because that's his real name. And there's footage of Bruce in the studio conducting the harmonies and producing the session.
Wow.
And it just goes to show that Bruce is, he was making rock and roll when it was in its infancy. He was doing the same with psychedelic music in its infancy. And even today, he's still interested in producing modern music. Or even think about like the Beach Boys Wipeout, which he had an involvement in putting together. That was in hip hop's infancy. And I think Bruce is really devoted to always pushing forward in his own way. And it's been very cool as a Beach Boys fan to watch. Because like he keeps doing these like random Bruce things, like just like how you're like, what, he was on the wall? It's like, what,
Right.
he's writing for Skrillex? Like,
Those are my
he's
favorite
just
kind
a
of people,
cool
though.
guy.
You know,
Exactly.
so versatile, do so many different things that they just constantly surprise you, constantly keep you on your toes.
Amen. I think he's kind of like one of the Beach Boys' unsung heroes.
Oh yeah.
And
the secret weapon.
He's totally like the secret weapon to this day. I really hope you guys can see. I mean, the Beach Boys are definitely all getting back together, God willing, if they all make it to the proposed concerts that have been talked about.
Yeah.
But even in the meantime, if Mike and Bruce are ever in your guys' neck of the woods, I'd recommend it, or to any of our viewers, because I mean, they're the Beach Boys right now, and the Beach Boys show is still amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen Brian 3 times, and I feel like I should see Mike and Bruce at least once, just because I feel like if I don't, I'm going to always look back and wish that I did.
Yeah, they're great, and they still sound the same, and you would love it. If you can appreciate Brian's show, it's kind of the same now. Mike and Bruce, their band's pretty much just as big, and they have just as interesting set lists.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Really?
really a
great.
treat to see either of them. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, if you see them at a fair, it's going to be like Endless Summer. But if you're lucky enough to see them at a theater, they might pull out Surf's Up, or they might pull out, you know, I've heard Sail on Sailor, I've heard All This Is That. So, you know, they're doing cool stuff too.
Good. That's awesome. One final thought for me, a song that we didn't mention from Summer in Paradise, which is my favorite song on there. Yeah. And I think an amazing Bruce song is Slow Summer Dancing. And you want to talk about great chord progression. That chord progression is wild. I love that.
Like I think there's like a minor 7 flat 5 chord in there, and
there's definitely some minor major 7s also, I think.
Yeah.
We were talking about how he loves that chord.
Yeah. Yeah, and
She Believes in Love Again, I like.
Totally.
So
he never lost the touch, and I really hope. Unfortunately, his contribution to this new California music album is a re-record of She Believes in Love Again, which was actually from That's Why God Made the Radio sessions. So I've been wanting to hear it for a long time. The funny thing is, the one from That's Why God Made the Radio sessions was a revisiting of one from 2007 or 8. But I'm excited to hear whatever. I wonder if it's a Joe Thomas-ified version. But I hope we can hear one more Bruce original, or a few more.
I was just looking through That's Why God Made the Radio to see if Bruce contributed to anything on there. John Bon Jovi had something to do with Summer's Gone.
Yeah, believe it or not.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the writing for that, was him, Brian, and Joe Thomas in a room together. Can you believe it?
And Brian from like 2012, right?
Do I have to believe it? Crazy.
That's wild. Is that it? Did we cover everything?
I think so.
Yeah,
that was pretty good.
It.
Right.
Yeah, we went for a while. I mean, for somebody like Bruce Johnston, I think we covered about as much as we could.
Yeah, I'm really glad. And kind of like with the Spectre thing, we should continue kind of putting a spotlight on these unsung heroes.
Absolutely. Let's keep doing it. Just give me a name, and I'll look into it and try to figure out a few things that I can contribute. Because you're just like an encyclopedia when it comes to this stuff. It's great. I love it.
I try.
It saves me a lot of time of looking through all this stuff. You know, just listen to you.
Well, again, I'm so honored that I have some guys and an avenue to share it with.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
It makes me feel like there was actually a reason to learn all this.
Yeah, Yeah, well, it's good to be passionate about stuff like this, but then when you have an outlet to actually share your passion with other people, it makes it even that much more enjoyable.
Right.
Totally. And I don't know, even to put a little bow on things, but just like, you know, for anyone watching this once it's uploaded, like these comments, when I go and look at the comments, and they're so meaningful, and the Beach Boys community is really such a great group of people, and
Yeah.
you know, we're a lucky bunch, and I'm so glad for the music that they made
Me
and
too.
for the
Amen.
community that it creates.
It's so funny because from covering so many different artists on my YouTube channel, I've gotten kind of a feeling for a lot of different groups, fan bases. And the Beach Boys by far is like the most positive and just down to earth, just really nice, sweet people. No weird vibes or weird egos. I mean, every once in a while, obviously, you get the occasional weirdo. It's just inevitable. But in terms of the overall vibe of the community, very positive. Great group of people.
Yep.
Whole lot of good vibrations and love and mercy.
Yeah, well, I think the music
And
brings it out
fun,
of them. Yeah, you had to.
I can keep going all day. You guys.
I'm sure you could. Yeah.
It's too easy. Yeah, it's too easy. You have to.
Well, good night, baby. Sleep tight, baby.
All right. I think that it covers just about everything. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And thank you guys for doing this. Very informative, as usual.
Of course.
Got a lot of new stuff to check out. So, yeah, everybody check out those albums. Maybe we'll find some of the links and put them in the comments if they're on YouTube.
Perfect.
Cool.
It was great as always.
Yes.
Likewise. I'll see you guys soon. Have a good night.
See ya. Bye.
Later.